Well, first, thank you all for having me here today. I am the incumbent controller. I've been in the job for 20 months. I was appointed by the governor back in January 2015. I came to this role from the private sector. I spent 25 years in business, working at companies including McKinsey & Company, Procter & Gamble, and Helene Curtis. I have a master's in business from Northwestern. And then when I stopped working full-time, I went to really volunteer in my community, and also have a very long history as a volunteer with human service organizations, in particular helping those who are developmentally disabled. I've sat on our board of directors for 3 years. And so I come to this office of comptroller with both a very strong understanding of financial responsibility, budgets, having to actually live up to what you have committed to. I had P&L responsibility for my businesses at Helene Curtis. I ran the $800 million U.S. hair care business when I was there. So I bring the financial side, but also a big heart for human service. And during my time in this office, I have tried to use both of those. I have been, I think, a very strong voice for fiscal responsibility in the state. I have used the megaphone that comes with the comptroller's office to speak out about the impact of running the state without a budget, running our state with unbalanced budgets, how devastating the devastating effect that it has on the state. I have visited and spoken with organizations, municipalities, human service groups all around the state, and offered really our help in the comptroller's office to help them get through this difficult period. I have also led personally in my office on fiscal matters. I cut my own budget 10%. Initially, we consolidated offices, we cross-trained people. We have the lowest headcount in our office's history, and I'd say we've probably been through the most challenging year that we've ever had in this office. I also, working with the governor's CIO, began a project. I'm one of the leaders on a project that will implement a new statewide accounting ERP system, which will make our state finances and really all the operations of the state more efficient, more affordable, and importantly, more transparent. We'll see where our spending is. It will save our state $500 million annually when it's fully up and running, and we are through 1 year of our pilot on it. So I've worked on the social service side, helping social service organizations. I've tried to also lead by example. As you know, I put the legislative and elected officer pay in line with the rest of the state's bills in April. I did so because I really felt like with organizations all around the state who wait months for payment, social service organizations, small businesses, everyone is waiting, medical care providers, that it's wrong for those of us who are elected or in elected positions to be prioritized over the people whose tax dollars pay our salaries. And so I put us all in the same line. I've really tried to, I think, be a steady hand through this fiscal crisis and to try and help everyone get through it as much as possible. I have worked with the Mayor of Chicago and on CPS funding. We've helped Chicago State with their funding. We expedite payments out as soon as we're able legally to make payments. And I can just say it's been a challenging year. We do not have enough money in the state, as we all know. Our expenditures far exceed our revenues, and so every day it's like triage in the office. And what we've tried to do is to pay everything in the order that it comes in, prioritizing payments that have to be made on a certain pay date under the law, like our debt payments, pension contributions, the salaries, etc. And then also pulling up and helping the human service organizations, serving those most in need just before they're ready to shut their doors because they can't make a payment. We've given them our numbers, they call us, and we will find a voucher we can pay and get that money out to you. So we're really just trying to keep a lot of balls in the air all at the same time. And so that's what I've been doing. I would say I would like to, I'm running for election for the remaining 2 years of the term. Because I'd really like to stay here and continue what I've started. I'd like to see through, or at least get much closer to finishing this ERP project, the new state accounting system. We've been an advocate for transparency initiatives. We revised our website, number one. You can now view it easily on a mobile phone. You can easily access the state's checkbook online, which is called the ledger, and see where payments are. That was not as easily done before. We introduced a new tool a few months ago called Open Book, something that Comptroller Dan Hines had started, but through technology and a lot of things wasn't really very workable. Old state contract numbers and data that was not updated. So we built an entirely new tool. I use the same name, and it now has state contract data that you can pull down like in a Google drop-down menu. And it marries up with donations coming, quarterly updates from the State Board of Elections. So it's up-to-date data. It lets us see what state contracts are, coming into the state and who those organizations are donating to. And I think to the extent that we can see what's going on, it maybe helps keep all of us, maybe a little more accountable. And that's what the kinds of things I like to continue to do, really try and drive good fiscal policy in the state. I'm a lifelong Illinoisan. I just want to see our state get back on a good track. And maybe just a couple other things maybe to mention quickly. I took this appointment not because I was seeking a new job, but because I thought the skills that I had, the combination of business and human services, could be of value in the state. I gave up the opportunity to participate in the state pension plan. I am not part of the state health care plan. My husband is employed. We have health care through his firm. I worked many years, as my husband still works, and we've saved for our own retirement. We have a 401k, just like most people who've worked in the private sector, that we put away money towards our whole working careers. So I'm really here just to serve the people of Illinois, and hope to continue to do that for 2 more years.
I've been fortunate to hear you on several occasions speak out, and one was IBA, even well over a year ago, the women's conference with IBA, and your passion was there. And do you feel like you're having an impact on? Is your voice being heard? I guess is how do you feel like you're being received? I guess
I believe I'm having an impact, or honestly, I wouldn't be wasting my time doing this. I think I've done a good job, a very good job of educating people on the problems of our state. We all have known for a very long time that we have financial problems in the state of Illinois, but it's really hard for the average person to understand how bad they are. And you probably heard my example. I've given this a number of places, but after going through the problems with the state's backlog of bills, currently today it's about $8.5 billion. The fact that we've made promises to fund things like higher education that we still have not paid for, that's about another $2.2 billion. The fact that we have $115 billion of unfunded pension liabilities in the state, and we have $100 million on average every day to pay bills with. And then somebody will say, well, how come we can't pay for this? And so it made me realize that billions and millions and hundreds of millions, the numbers are too large. Everybody knows we have a problem, but nobody understands how bad it is. So I started taking 6 zeros off of all the numbers to explain it to people. And I'll tell you, I've taken this example to business organizations. I've talked with legislators about it, to human service organizations, and it really makes it clear very quickly how bad the situation in the state is. Because if you take 6 zeros off of those numbers, off of $100 million, it's like having $100 in your checking account. You're paying bills that you have right now that total $8,500, between $8,000 and $9,000 of the bills that you've got sitting here you've got to pay. You've spent money. You don't have those bills in your hand yet, but this is higher education. It'd be like having another $2,000 of the bills that you're going to be showing up in your mailbox. And I call it opening up your credit card statement to see what you owe on our unfunded pension liability, you would see a bill of over $115,000, and you have to make a monthly payment on it, and you have $100. And tomorrow you have about another 100, and the next day you might have another 80 or 100. But you can string a lot of 80s and 100s together, and it doesn't even make a dent in the over $8,000 worth of bills you have now, much less pensions or anything else. And when I describe it like that, people finally say, oh, now I get why it's so bad, why people wait months. So from that standpoint, I feel like I've really made a difference getting a lot of people on the same page with the state's finances. And then I am really happy, warms my heart when I hear from a lot of the human service organizations that we've helped, and I get letters all the time from people organizations all around the state thanking me for being a voice for them in government, for being the office that answers the phone when they feel like no one will help them. And I've heard from everywhere from Leslie Bates Davis House in East St. Louis and Bryan's Manor in Centralia to organizations all over the Chicago area. The IARF, Illinois Association of Rehabilitation Facilities, is a coalition of a number of groups that serve a lot of people with various disabilities. They nominated me for Governing Magazine's Elected Official of the Year because of my service to them. So I feel like I'm making a difference for them, and it really, I think those two things keep me going every day.
There are so many human services agencies that are having budget problems because of the budget situation. You know, we've heard from several of them here. What criteria do you look at in terms of, you know, you're not able to help all of them? How do you evaluate and, you know, the triage you spoke of every day?
So the reason we can't help all of them is because without a budget in place, as the controller, I am required to pay. I can only pay bills if we have the legal authority to make the payment. And those who were unable to help, who really have been hurt badly this last year, have not fallen under any of the court orders, any of the legal mechanisms to make payments. If they did, we've paid them. So anybody who we had a legal mechanism to make a payment to, we made that payment. And we even, in many cases, went to agencies and said, can't we pay this group under this court order? One example of that is back in the fall, we learned that, about a year ago actually, we learned that early intervention providers, these are organizations that help infants through toddlers who have developmental delays and disabilities, that they had not been paid since March. And I found that because I do outreach through phone calls. I do these teletown halls with 300 organizations on the phone, and that was when we first learned about it. I couldn't understand why they hadn't been paid since March. We had a budget in place for at least 3 months of that period of time. So we learned that it's been normal practice in the state to just sit on the last quarter's worth of bills and not send them in for payment. So the agencies hold those vouchers. They don't send them into our office to be paid. They go in as soon as there's a new budget and a new year because they've overspent the allocation. It's one of the reasons why we have so many problems today. It's chronic overspending for many, many years. But it has worked in past years, but they got into this year and there was no budget that they could be paid under. So they had gone 6 or 7 months without payment. They were very small organizations. We went back and worked with the agency and found a way to have them covered under some of the court orders that were there to help developmentally disabled. We were able to get them paid. And so we do outreach like that, but the biggest problem has been our operating without a budget. All the organizations, homeless and drug and alcohol abuse victims are the ones that really come to mind. None of those programs were covered under any court orders, anything. If there were contracts in place that we could, pending a budget, many of those were covered, at least in part, under the stopgap bill that was passed. And so while there's been some varying opinions on the stopgap bill, for me as the controller, I'm happy that those organizations that have been hanging out there all year providing services at our request, the state's request, we were finally able to get some payments out to.
How would you go about changing that culture in terms of the chronic overspending, not so much by the legislature apparently, but that's true too, but at the agency? It's
so what has typically happened is there has been a lack of willingness to say this is how much money you have and to live within it, and it's at the agency level. In the past year, so when I was sworn into office in January 2015, we were operating under the second half of the fiscal 15 budget that was signed under Governor Quinn. In that budget, agencies were instructed to just spend whatever they needed because I think the governor thought he was going to be elected, and they were going to make that temporary tax increase permanent. At least that's what I heard from agencies. As a result, they spent their year's worth of spending quite early, and they were running out of money. And the biggest place we saw this happen was in childcare. You'll recall in March of 2015, there was a huge childcare crisis. They were instructed to just spend, I believe it was $1.6 billion more than was funded. And I think the idea was that that would be caught up at some point with the temporary tax increase, and it wasn't. And so they were out of money. And the legislature and the governor had to work together to figure out how they were going to fund that. And then as soon as they did find a way to pay for it and to give me the legal authority, we expedited those payments out. We had everybody paid within just a few days. But it is a chronic unwillingness to, I believe, attack the fundamental drivers of the costs in our state. And as a result, we end up looking at what our options are. Do we cut social services? No one wants to do that. Do we cut education? No one wants to do that. The real problem in our budgets are we have extremely high fixed costs in the state, and those fixed costs are growing, and the biggest driver of that is the cost of our pensions. Because of underfunding for decades, promising benefits that were never paid for, pension holidays, borrowing from the pension funds that all happened for many decades, both parties. A lot of people have their fingers in this, but really the wheels fell off the bus on the pensions from 2001 to 2010. In 2001, in the early 2000s, we had $30 billion of unfunded pension liabilities. In 2006 and 2007, they took the pension holidays and didn't fund the pensions. Instead of funding pensions, they spent that money on other programs that they didn't want to either raise taxes for or rein in or cut. When we finished that, we had $75 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. Today, we have 115. So the bad decisions, short-term financial decisions made in the past, we are paying for now. If we had normally funded our pensions, properly funded them every year, we would be spending roughly $2 billion of our general revenue to make the contributions into the pension funds. Because we did not, this year we're going to spend about $8.5 billion. Next year it's going to be over $9 billion. Last year was about $7 billion. Every year it goes up about $1 billion, $1.5 billion. That $6.5 billion difference this year, that funds a lot of things in the state. It funds human services. It funds education. It funds, a lot of things that right now people are feeling we don't have the money to fund. It's because we don't solve the problem of the fact that we have pensions that are really upside down. That payment is now taking up over a quarter of our state's budget of general revenue, and those checks, the people in the pension system make up about 4% of our state's population. It's completely upside down. It's not their fault. They've paid what they were told to pay. They were promised retirements. And it's critical that we look at how to ensure the solvency of this going forward so that we can pay what's been promised to people and we can get on a sustainable path to the future so we're not eating up all of our current resources in the state funding pensions at the expense of educating our children, human services, taking care of people most in need, public safety, et cetera. It's kind of the track we're on.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've been on record as saying that the state is going to have more revenue.
I do believe we
to
have
deal
more
with that.
revenue.
Have you communicated that directly to the governor?
Yes, and the governor's actually said himself, I believe I heard it in his budget address, that he would sign on for more revenue. But I'll also tell you, and I speak as a business person and someone who's also spent a lot of time talking to businesses all around the state, one of the things businesses need to be able to invest and put people to work and want to bring their business here and grow is some amount of predictability. They need to know, what's my tax rate going to be? What kind of expenses can I expect to incur so that they can budget and plan? Illinois has been anything but predictable. Our tax rates are incoherent in many respects. They were up, they were down. We brought in we raised taxes in 2011 with the promise to pay down the unfunded, the bill backlog that we had in-house, which at the time was about $10 billion. We ended in 2015, when I was sworn in actually, we had $8 billion in unpaid bills. So we went down $2 billion. During those 4 years, we brought in $32 billion of revenue. Where did that money go? It went to pay pensions, it went to fund other programs that got thrown on. So businesses look at that and say, I was okay with the temporary tax increase to solve the problem, you didn't solve the problem. And so I believe that if we are going to get out of this mess, and I do believe we can do it, it's going to take really beyond, we must address the pension issue and really get on a solvable path to the future where we begin to stop that cost curve from going up, level it off, and begin to bend it down. But we will need three things. We will need a comprehensive look at how we run our government and take costs out everywhere where it's not helping people. We're not efficient in the state. The state's accounting system, which I already spoke about, is costing us $500 million annually just to maintain it and to keep all these things going. We have there's just a lot of opportunity to streamline, I think. And like I did in my own office, I didn't fire one person and cut my budget 10%. We just did more with less. So, and then on the revenue side, you can look at revenue both from raising taxes, but also from a growing economy. And I know from my business experience that a growing economy can make up a lot of revenue very fast if you actually put the conditions in place to make it happen. We cannot tax ourselves out of this. We can raise taxes somewhat, but we cannot solve the whole problem on taxes. To get out of the mess that we have built on the bill backlog, what we owe to our universities, et cetera, where we expect to end, given that we are still running the state without a budget, and we're adding $400 to $500 million more in cost every single month to the state that we can't pay for. We are looking at being somewhere between $10 and $12 billion behind at the end of the fiscal year, and I think 12 to 14 at the end of the fiscal, 10 to 12 at the end of the calendar, if you add those all together. We, to solve it with taxes alone would require us to add somewhere between 3 and 4 percentage points to our current tax rate, taking us up somewhere between 7 and 8% on a state income tax basis. No one will vote for that, nor should they. People won't stay here for this if they have the means to go. Businesses will leave. So we can't, while we can raise taxes somewhat, we have to put in place some things that will help bring costs down for businesses so that will kind of even them out. And I know that there are a lot of topics on the table that are highly toxic that no one wants to talk about. But I do think there are at least a couple that there should be some common ground on and some ways for everyone to get together. And the biggest one is workers' comp reform. That, honestly, for the life of me, I cannot understand why we cannot get that done. It saves money everywhere. It saves money in our schools, in our municipalities, in the state. We pay those rates for employees. We pay it. Every contract we enter into has the cost of that built into the contract in the state. It saves money in businesses. It helps. Workers' comp rates are particularly high in manufacturing companies because of the nature of the business. So actually bringing the rates down, adding in some small amount of causation would help our manufacturing base. It brings skilled labor jobs back to Illinois and helps those expand. It is good for everyone. I don't know why we cannot get that done. I heard a statistic from our recently former DCEO, Jim Schultz, who told me that the average workers' comp claim in Illinois is $30,000 per claim. In California, it's $16,000. We are almost double what California is. We have some room for improvement. This is something we should all be able to agree on. It's good for union and non-union. It's good for government and private sector. Nonprofits pay these same. It's good for everyone. The second area is property taxes. We have the highest property taxes in the country in the state of Illinois. I know this is a harder thing because our municipalities need flexibility to be able to manage the increasing costs with fire and pensions that they shoulder. There's been a lot of divisive language with respect to anti-union things that go along with that. But I do think that if we put the challenge on the table to say, how can we at least put in place a temporary freeze in property taxes in a way that we can all agree to, we could look at a lot of the unfunded mandates that the state passes down, and there are lots that cost our municipalities, our schools, a lot of money. In the schools, I've heard about the driver's education program that's mandated by the state that everybody has to have. Well, where I live in the Chicago suburbs, we have so many private options up there, it's not even funny that most kids take the private school because they can get in and get their license faster than taking it through the high school. But in Southern Illinois, they don't have that, and so they probably do need it mandated there. We don't have to have a one-size-fits-all for everything. We can do things that help keep costs down where they're not as important and help our municipalities, our schools better manage their finances, which would naturally bring down the costs. And if we could, again, get a hold of the pension crisis and stop that from going up, that would also help to level out the costs and free up something that would allow us maybe to just hold taxes even. So I don't know, I'm sure there are other ideas out there. I just believe if everyone would work together and put the state first instead of political careers, and try and do what's right to get us out of this mess. I can say as a business person, I've had to turn around businesses that were failing. We all don't have the same opinion. We sit down around the table to get the best ideas out there. But we throw out our best ideas, and we keep the goal of what we're trying to do at the center, and we come to an agreement, and then we execute it. And it's probably the one thing that's been the most eye-opening to come really from the outside, even though I'm the incumbent. In this race, I'm the newcomer to state government in my race, because really people don't work at solving the problem at hand and put the state first generally. They think about whether they can take that vote or what impact it's going to have on their ability to maintain their position. And I think if they did the right thing, voters would happily keep them in office. So.
The things you just articulated are all pretty much mirror the governor's turnaround agenda, which he's linked to the passage of the budget. Given the impact that we've had from not passing a budget, especially the fact that we're digging in deeper every day with, debt-wise, has it been worth it to link the turnaround agenda to the budget process, or should that have been done separately? I
don't think what I just went through is not the whole turnaround agenda. It's 2 items of it. And I think a lot of the hang-ups with the turnaround agenda have been on the anti-union related things and the term limits and fare maps, a lot of those kind of things that, a negotiation, everybody gets something, but you never get everything. And so I can't speak for the governor. I would, if it were me, I would not expect to get everything that I wanted in order to get, but I would expect to get something. And what I just walked you through, put on the table, the reason I link it is not necessarily because it's part of the turnaround agenda. It's because I honestly don't believe we can get out of the financial mess we're in without a growing economy. Unless we want to see our taxes go up, which I think if we do that, it'll be devastating for our economy and jobs. People are already leaving our state, people who can. Businesses are leaving our state. I've traveled everywhere in the state, from Rockford to Carbondale. I was just in Quincy this morning. I've been to all around the southern Chicago suburbs that are border Indiana. I live in Lake County, 20 minutes from the Wisconsin border. We've seen businesses all over just pick up and move their operations just across the border, the river, wherever. And so people and businesses have choices. I think if we want our state to get strong again and get out of this mess, we need to be looking at ways to expand our tax base and to bring people here, because businesses that are growing pay taxes. People who move here and have a job pay taxes. And so if we give them incentives to leave, they will. But if we give them incentives to stay, there's a lot here in Illinois that people would want to move here for. Great schools, great transportation, water, abundant sources of fresh water, farm fields. I mean, so many wonderful things in our state. but we really make it hard for people and businesses to want to come here. So to your specific question about was it smart to link them, it's not, in my opinion, having looked at the numbers side of it, I don't think it's possible to get a balanced budget without economic growth because we are too far in the hole. We could have before, probably, before our unfunded pension liabilities were $115 billion and taking up 8.5 on the way to $9 billion of our state's budget. We could have before. We could have before we had, nearly $9 billion of bills, so we didn't have the money to pay. But I don't think we can now, unless we want to look at a 2 or 3 year way of raising taxes a little and getting out of it. But that's what we just did. We did that with the temporary tax increase. We raised our taxes. It was higher for 4 years. We ended up only down $2 billion with worse unfunded pension liabilities and almost, just barely made a dent in the bills. So that's why I think what's important for us to do is not focus on the turnaround agenda, but solving the problem, the financial problem of the state, and what are the right things to do to that. And if we did that, everybody would have to give some and put something on the table. And there are things that everyone ought to be able to agree on. And workers' comp is really the biggest one.
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but what's your sense of, do you have a figure on how much interest we're paying people that payments have been delayed?
We pay 1% a month interest on bills that are in-house for more than 90 days. So
it doesn't start for 3 months?
Right.
And then it's 1% a month until the bill's paid?
Correct.
Okay.
So that's, once they're in and they're waiting a long time, it's 12% annually. And I believe the healthcare, I want to say the healthcare is 9%. So 9% to healthcare, it's a little less, but it's still a lot relative to what you get if you're going to invest your own money in anything these days. It's a very high interest rate. We paid, this year, I believe, we were on track for fiscal 16. I haven't seen the final numbers on that because it's hard when you don't have a budget to finish anything. But I believe we are on track to having a total expenditure of somewhere between $300 and $400 million in interest in fines. And over the years, we have spent, since this practice was put into place, more than $1 billion of late fees because we pay our bills so late. It's a huge cost. Lately, it hasn't been quite so bad. We've been really working to try and pay bills within the 90-day turnaround, and we are right now paying bills as of today. We're paying them bills from June 6th. So we're a little bit behind, but only, roughly not quite a month into it. Really the biggest group that's being hurt right now, and we will owe a lot of money to in fines and late fees if they survive to get them, are the medical care providers who provide the services to state employees under the state health insurance plans. They were underappropriated for 2 years by the legislature, just not given enough money to fund, so the money ran out and there were bills hanging around that then got paid some the next year. And then as we entered the no budget period a year ago in July, they weren't part of anything that was covered, and they were not part of the stopgap. And so we have medical care providers that have not been paid in 2 years. And I get phone calls in our office from doctors that have small practices serving primarily state employees who tell us they're about to lose their businesses because we haven't paid them in 2 years.
Really quickly, because we're running out of time here, should the officers of comptroller and treasurer be combined? Why or why not? And if you favor it, what would this new organization look like?
I'm a big supporter of consolidating the offices. Most businesses have a financial officer, chief financial officer, with an investment arm and a controlling arm. I would imagine that an organization in the state would look similar. It would save us, the estimate is about $12 million annually, which in the scheme of billions, isn't a lot of money, but I remind people if we thought about 12 million as a lot of money, we wouldn't be billions of dollars in debt today. So I think it's a lot of money to me. So we would have probably a consolidation of offices, office space. We would be able to use a lot of similar systems. And over time, we'd begin to probably have, while you still have separate and distinct functions within it, you'd have fewer people. And the hang-up, of course, is there was legislation drafted. It passed the Senate unanimously. It has not been called for a vote in the Illinois House. It would have to go for a vote, then be put on the ballot for voters to vote on, because it would require a constitutional amendment. But I believe most people think it's a good idea. You know, when you talk to people in the state, if it saves money, it's something we should be doing.
So in the end, does it make a lot of difference, given that a Republican is the comptroller or a Democrat's the comptroller? Does party affiliation make any difference when it comes to the understanding the issue and dealing with the day-to-day stuff you deal with?
I think that the offices of the comptroller and the treasurer, honestly, are two of the really the least partisan offices in the state. You know, I think what's important is whoever is in this role understands the fiscal issues very well. We have not always had that, frankly, and will apply the law equally. We'll work with everyone equally. You know, I don't know about the party part of your question. I would say that, you know, in this case, an unfriendly comptroller to a governor, either way, could make a governor's job very difficult. And so, you know, I am proud to say that I really tried to approach my office as one of service, and that we're here to work with everyone. I stood up to the governor right away when he asked me to withhold fair share union dues within a couple weeks of office. And I said, no, I can't do that. I have to follow the law. And the law will not allow me to go set up a separate account. It would be a very bad precedent for a comptroller to set. I had to, you know, I've worked, as I mentioned, with Mayor Emanuel and Senator Trotter on helping Chicago State and Chicago Public Schools in the case of Mayor Emanuel. We've worked with human service organizations all around the state, many of whom are led by Democrats. I think really it's about doing the job that you're sent to do, which is, as the state's chief fiscal officer, trying to lead good policy to the extent that I can without a vote in the state, but also help organizations in the state who rely on help from the state or provided services we have to pay, help them all, regardless of who they are, what party they are, get through this very difficult time when the state has really, leadership in our state has put our state in a very bad position.